Lorwyn Eclipsed, the first expansion set of the Magic the Gathering franchise of 2026, and a contender for the best set of this year considering that the bulk of what we have for the rest of the year is nostalgia slop based on, among others, a cartoon from the 80s and a really mediocre movie franchise that everyone stopped caring about 5 years ago. Actually, Marvel is a comic book franchise and it started as— Shut up, bitch! We don't care about all that nerd crap. We're here to talk about Magic the Gathering, which isn't nerdy at all. We're also here to talk about history, because not many people know this, but the world of Lorwyn is actually based on Celtic mythology, myself included, until the professor mentioned it.
Toxic yowie.
So today I wanted to look at some of the core themes, creatures, and locations of Lorwyn, and see how they compare to the Celtic myths and religious practices of ancient times. The world of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, first introduced in the Lorwyn set released in 2007, is a pastoral realm of lush forests and thriving nature, where the sun never fully sets and summer never ends. However, once every 300 years, an event called the Great Aurora occurs, turning Lorwyn into Shadowmoor, a perpetually dark world where, just like in the real UK and Ireland, the sun is always obscured by clouds. During the Aurora, all of the world's inhabitants are turned into sick freaking twisted edgelord versions of themselves, with no prior knowledge of their past life in Lorwyn. Speaking of its inhabitants, Lorwyn is home to 9 major races that populate the realm, including elementals, elves, faeries, giants, goblins, Kithkin, Merfolk, Shapeshifters, and Treefolk, each having their own respective tribes, with the exception of Shapeshifters, which infiltrate the other tribes. It's also one of the few realms in Magic not to feature any humans. In the most recent iteration of Lorwyn, which is Lorwyn Eclipsed, which released in January 2026, the two mirror worlds of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor have been merged into one after the death of the Fairy Queen, who was responsible for the Great Aurora. And much like that YouTuber who took a bunch of laxatives and anti-diarrheals at the same time, the two worlds have merged and are competing in a strange way. First, I know this sounds pedantic, but I want to establish who I'm referring to when I talk about the Celtic peoples. If you look up the Celts, once you wade through all the sports teams, you icky sports, you'll find this map of Indo-European peoples connected by languages all in a Celtic language family, extending through Central and Western Europe and as far east as Anatolia and modern-day Turkey, and as far back as the 2nd century BC. However, Celtic mythologies and religions are typically classified as this region, where Celtic languages were spoken in the Middle Ages, or are still spoken today, which is Ireland, Scotland, Wales, parts of England, and the Breton Peninsula in France, also called Brittany. In other words, pretty much exactly where you point to on a map if someone asked you where the Celtic culture was, so I don't know why I took all this time explaining that. As for the Celtic religion, not much is actually known to us today, mainly because the religious leaders, called the Druids, seemingly were forbidden from recording details about their religion. Most of our information about the Celtic religion comes from archaeology, writings of early Christian immigrants to the region, or Greco-Roman sources. The latter two were either ignorant to their religion to varying extent, or had motivation to misconstrue the Celtic religion as more barbaric than it actually was. However, the Greco-Roman sources are our best, and specifically, funnily enough, Julius Caesar himself is our only first-hand account of the Druids and their religion, having traveled there and even made friends with one of them. Nevertheless, the religious side of Celtic culture doesn't appear much in Lorwyn, likely because of the aforementioned lack of knowledge on it, so I won't dwell long on that, but for a quick overview, since it's interesting, the Celts believed in a pagan religion, headed by gods such as Taranis, Ceranos, and Nipona. They had animistic beliefs holding reverence over nature and animals, and believing that spirits inhabited these things, as well as having sacred groves and springs where they would hold rituals. The secret grove motif is shown in Lorwyn, especially in the Shocklands, but this is a motif that pops up a lot in fantasy worlds, for example, Legend of Zelda. The religious leaders were the aforementioned Druids, who handled prayer, divination, magic, and sacrifice, that is, animal sacrifice and human sacrifice. Supposedly one of these rituals involved making a giant wicker effigy, stuffing it with people alive, and, you know, burning them alive, which, as you probably guessed, is where the Wicker Man movie with Nicolas Cage found its inspiration. I know I just said that sources tried to make the Celtic religion look bad, but there is enough archaeological evidence to support that there was human sacrifice to some capacity. Although it seems to also be a common belief that Druids practiced cannibalism, that simply isn't true. Some archaeologists believe that some bog bodies that have been discovered were sacrifices, even kings that were thrown into the bog for crop failure or whatever else, which is crazy. Like, Lamau, my potatoes went bad, I want to talk to the manager. Actually, I want to kill the manager. Unlike the Celtic religion, Celtic mythology and folklore have survived very well both in writing and oral tradition, which, like, obviously, because if it didn't, I wouldn't be making this video and Lorwyn wouldn't exist. Celtic mythology can be divided into Brittonic, including the Bretons, Cornish, and Welsh, and Gaelic, including the Irish, Scottish, and Hebridean islands. Why? Because that's how Wikipedia formatted them. I don't know. Each of these cultures has its own versions of myths and legends, despite being similar, and Lorwyn samples a bit from each of them. So let's see how these compare with their real-world mythological counterparts. The bifaceted world of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor may be based off of the concept of the Otherworld, or the Tir na Nog in Irish mythology, which is a spiritual world of the gods that is parallel to our own. The Otherworld contains spiritual beings, ancestors, and strange mythical creatures, and it's a world of everlasting youth and joy, where time operates differently from the material world. There are various folk tales of heroes who venture over to the Otherworld, lured in by a beautiful woman who, in exchange for his bravery on the journey, promises her love. Or an apple. What is he, a horse? To get to the Otherworld, they travel across the ocean or enter a portal, found in a burial mound or dolmen, which is a megalithic tomb made of stones similar to Stonehenge. This idea of a dolmen as a gate to another world can be seen on the card, Dolmen Gate. The concept of two parallel but opposite worlds is fundamental to Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, and I think that the comparison can be made of the picturesque world of Lorwyn to the Celtic Otherworld, strengthened by the fact that the Otherworld grows closer to the mortal world at dawn and dusk. Plus our real world is looking more like Shadowmoor by the day. I think it's also worth noting that in Irish mythology specifically, their mythological and semi-historical legend stories are recorded in collections called cycles. The mythological cycle, Ulster cycle, Fianna cycle, and King cycle. These are just categories for collections of stories and not anything literally cyclical. But I kept reading about these and wanting to connect them to the Lorwyn Shadowmoor cycle. I thought that maybe the Magic story writers picked up on that phrase and it kind of sparked the idea for the Great Aurora. Do I have any evidence for that though? No. Not at all. It's probably not even true. I just wanted to throw that out there. The Faeries, or Fae, are probably the most iconic creatures to Lorwyn, and the most iconic mythological creatures of Celtic culture at that. Scottish poet Andrew Lang is quoted as saying that Irish folklore revolves entirely around fairies, and I'm actually writing this part of the script after all the other creatures in this list, and I can confirm that yes, everything in Irish folklore, and pretty much all of Celtic folklore for that matter, is a fairy. The term fairy was almost more of a catch-all term for a mythological creature than it was a specific type of being. It doesn't matter if it was an elf, a giant, a mermaid, or a demon, they were all called fairies, despite having virtually no relation to one another. Nevertheless, if you whittle it down to just the fairies, in Irish folklore there are actually two types of fairies: the small ethereal winged creatures you most commonly think of, and the Ishi, which we'll talk more about later since they belong to another one of Lorwyn's races. The little flying things, which some folklorists refer to as solitary fairies, are secretive, nocturnal, and hostile towards humans, ranging in severity from playing small pranks on humans to attempting to kill them. They reside in hawthorn trees and circles of mushrooms called fairy circles, or most prominently in burial mounds, where the Ishi or Dinishi get their name, Dinishi translating to people of the mound. And that's just the Irish folklore. Scottish folklore divides fairies into the Seelie Court and Unseelie Court, essentially being fairies who kindly interact with humans and fairies malicious towards humans, respectively. Cornish folklore has 5 classifications of fairies, which they call the small people, those being Spriggans, Piskies, or Pixies, Bucas, Bockles, Knockers, and Brownies. Those are actual words. The Welsh call fairies Tulloeth Teague, which they have 5 categories for as well, those being, bear with me, this is Welsh, Elilon, Bwebachad, Coblanau, Gwyraged Anwyn, and Gwilion. The name of People of the Burial Mound may have had a hand in shaping the beliefs surrounding the fairies' origin. Many people believe that the fairies are fallen angels, souls of the dead lost in purgatory, or former gods or demigods of the Celtic pantheon. Of course, these beliefs stem from the introduction of Christianity into Ireland in the 5th century, combining Celtic mythology with Christian mythology, both as a way to appeal to the Celtic pagans of the region and get them to convert, and as a way of demoting pagan deities to demons or fallen angels. Like I mentioned before, the fairy myths that predate this period have mostly been lost due to the Christianization and lack of a writing system up until this point, but it's likely that fairies were just as important to their mythology before as they were to follow. Moving over to the funny cardboard world, the fairies, or fae of Lorwyn, resemble many of these Celtic myths. They are the same little flying troublemakers, albeit more vain, vapid, and vindictive, reveling both in gossip and whimsy as well as their own cruelty. Fae will travel around Lorwyn in groups of 3 to 6 called cliques, harvesting the dreams of other creatures of the realm. Much like bees to pollen, they physically carry these dreams back to their queen, Una, who herself is composed of flowers. Like I mentioned briefly before, Una, and by extension the Fae, are responsible for the Great Aurora in Lorwyn, and we can imagine the influence that Fae hold on Lorwyn as a sort of representation of the overwhelming prominence of fairies in Celtic folklore.
Elf, 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 elf.
Although our modern fantasy elves are based off of Tolkien's works, and Tolkien based them off of Scandinavian mythologies, the Celtic concept of the Ishi bears a striking resemblance to Lorwyn's knife-eared freaks. The Ishi were a type of fairy descending from the Tuatha De Danann, a divine race of beings from the Otherworld. The Tuatha De Danann were probably believed to be the race of the Celtic pantheon of gods, but they were only written about by the Christian settlers to the region after they had arrived, and they demoted them to being demigods or angels of some kind in their writings. Either way, the Celtic people revere the Ishi, leaving offerings for them near places where they were believed to have resided, in sacred trees, certain groves, and most notably in fairy mounds or burial mounds, again where they got their name. They are described as being the size of a regular human, in tune with nature, powerful, and extremely beautiful. Basically Lorwyn elves to a T. Great care is taken not to tread on their land or address them directly, as they are very territorial and may steal your kids to replace them with changelings. The elves of Lorwyn are also quite vain and hold a similar divine view of themselves to the Ishi, calling themselves the Blessed or the Blessed Nation. Their purpose is driven by aesthetics, striving to be as beautiful as they can and even seeking out picturesque locations and fervently protecting them, which we can sort of think of as their fairy mounds. They take the Ishi's beauty to the extreme, being obsessed with it, even to the point of their own hierarchy being a looks-maxing competition. In Shadowmoor, the elves take up a little thing I like to call extreme looks-maxing. Where simple mocking isn't enough, those uggos need to die. Much like Clavicular, the elves will simply just kill anything they think is ugly. Except the elves are probably using like bows and swords and stuff, and probably not cyber trucks to kill people, and they're probably also not smoking meth, but hey, what do I know?
Is he dead? Hopefully.
Didn't want to die? Well, you shouldn't have been ugly, chud.
Yo, I'm really sorry, okay? What is wrong with you? Why are you blue?
Changelings are the shapeshifters of Celtic mythology, as well as the name of the ability that gives magic's shapeshifters all creature types. Changelings appear across all of Celtic culture, but almost always involving a human baby getting swapped out with a changeling fairy baby. The reason is, I guess, like a cowbird tricks other birds into raising its young, the fairies/pixies/elves trick humans into raising a changeling baby. Except for in Scottish folklore, where the changeling baby is actually a fully grown elf man who wants to breastfeed from the mother. Hey, game is game. Bro just wants to suck a titty. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. In turn, the human baby is raised by the fairies or elves. Remember that show Wife Swap? It's kind of like that, but with babies. But how can you tell if your baby is a changeling? Well, worry not, there are various ways to test it. In Scotland, you can point to the woods and say, hey, your fairy mound's on fire, and the changeling will get up and say, wae's me, what will come of me wife and bairns? And run off. That's a direct quote, by the way. It's phonetically written exactly like I said it. Trust me. In Wales, you can cook your family a meal and put it in an eggshell, which the changeling would say, I've seen the acorn before the oak, but I've never seen the likes of this, and then disappear. Who comes up with this? And in Ireland, to test if your baby's a changeling, you just chuck it in the fireplace. If it's a changeling, it'll run up the chimney, and if it's real, well, either way, it's one less pest to worry about. Lorwyn shapeshifters are much less scheming and malicious. They kind of just blend in wherever they are and make noises to copy phrases to fit in. They copy both animals and humanoids, but aren't fully as intelligent as other sapient races. Like a parrot singing Rihanna, it doesn't understand Rihanna. A lot of bird references in this section. There's also a direct reference to the Celtic baby swapping myth shown in the card Crib Swap. Kithkin are a bit harder to pin down. I think they're most closely related to brownies in Scottish folklore, although there's a lot of small creatures like brownies in Celtic mythology, like corrigans and fions. Brownies are, again, mischievous little creatures, but this time they're basically just free housemaids. They will clean, do chores, and perform farm work, all while the family of the house they inhabit sleep at night. The families are expected to leave the brownies gifts such as bowls of porridge or cakes as a show of gratitude, but they are easily offended, and if you offer them the wrong food, or try to give them clothing, or try to baptize them, I don't know why you would try to do that unprompted anyway, they will get mad and leave your house forever. Kithkin are basically nothing like that, besides being small, hard-working humanoid creatures. They're basically just a small medieval human living in small farming villages called clachans, which is the real-world name given to some small villages in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. Their most unique feature is something called the thought weft, which is a quasi-hive mind where all Kithkin share emotions with one another, and it connects them in a shared sense of harmony. So they probably react like the hive mind from Pluribus if you yelled at one. In Shadowmoor, the thought weft is the mind weft, where instead of being emotionally connected in contentment, they're all emotionally connected with mass paranoia, like one giant myth psychosis. Also in some areas of England, brownies are called hobs, and this is where the name Hobbit came from, as Tolkien was inspired by the brownies when creating them. I read that Kithkin are probably inspired directly by hobbits, and since hobbits are inspired by brownies, I think that's close enough for me to say that Kithkin are inspired by brownies. Big boys, big problems. Next segment. Just kidding. Giants feature prominently in Welsh folktales, usually as dumb, brutish villains living in the mountains and waiting to be slain by our heroes. For example, there's an early Welsh story called Colwich and Olwen about a prince named Colwich who has to kill a giant named Isbadadin. And you guys are going to have to bear with me here because this is, again, Welsh, and I could look up all these words like I did with other words in this video, but it's funnier if I don't, so here we go. His father, King Silid, remarries after Colwich's mom, Goliudid, beautiful name, dies in childbirth. The king tries to get Colwich to marry his stepsister, and he's like, no, I'm not about that degen life, I'm no gooner, which makes his stepmom mad, and she curses him to marry a giant's daughter. To which he's like, oh no, a giant lady? Oh man, that'd be crazy, you know, like what if she stepped on me? I need to go find her right now. So he grabs his sword, Caled Fulch, and sets out with his homies, Kai, Bedwyr, Gwalchmai, Gwirhir, Gwalstaud, Lythoid, Minwa son of Tergwaid, and Kindilig Gifarwid. He finds the giant, Isbadadin, and tells him that he's down bad for his giantess daughter. And so the giant says, okay, but you need to do like 40 things just to prove that you're good enough for my baby girl. So Colwich says, you know what, actually, we're just gonna kill him. So he kills him, and Colwich and his big wife Olwen live happily ever after. Yay. Okay guys, I'm sorry, but that story did not matter at all. It's not relevant in the slightest. I just thought a story about a guy being infatuated with a giantess woman was funny, and I wanted to pronounce a bunch of Welsh words, which I think I did pretty well considering that Welsh is a fake language, and you can't convince me otherwise. The giants of Lorwyn are pretty chill in comparison, living in the mountains, hibernating often, and being hermits, explorers, even oracles, although they can be a bit short-tempered and territorial. When Shadowmoor comes around, they get dumb and mean and trample villages. Like I said, big boys, big problems.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me. Here too much raining.
The inclusion of Merfolk in Lorwyn is an obvious choice considering that Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, etc. are all surrounded by water, so there's plenty of myths about the creatures living within. Of course, these myths weren't invented there, and many of the stories could be based around the ancient Greek belief of sirens, also known as the Sea Women, which is the name of my workout routine. I see women taking walks at night, I chase them while screaming. For example, the Welsh Morgan and Irish Selkie are both sea creatures that attempt to drown people, the latter of which appears as a harp seal in the water, very cute, and sheds its skin become a very sexy lady on the land. The Selkie will sometimes find a human man to marry and have kids with, and even though she may love them, she'll always long to go back to the sea. But pro tip, the Selkie can't go back if you hide her sealskin, and she'll be stuck with you. And that is a little trick we in the 21st century call an abusive relationship. Selkies themselves actually appear in Shadowmoor, keeping the name but taking on a more fantastical appearance, somewhat like a mermaid, with their lower half being a seal with 4 flippers, and their upper half being a sort of human with seal-like creatures and 2 arms, sort of like a water centaur. There's numerous other water creatures as well, including the Loch Ness Monster, Blue Men of the Minch, and the Bean... I don't think I'm allowed to pronounce that word. There are, of course, regular old mermaids too, called Merrow in Irish folklore, which are the typical lower half fish, upper half gorgeous girl. There are also Merrow men, but they have been described as ugly, so we don't care. Merrow is the name given to the merfolk of Lorwyn as well, although they appear more as merfolk, having scaly skin and fins on their upper halves. In Lorwyn, Merrow have their own underground society, spanning the rivers and underground canals of the realm, divided into groups based on occupation called schools, you know, because fish, and peacefully trading and interacting with these so-called landwalker races. However, in Shadowmoor, Merrow become more fish-like in appearance and hostile in nature, killing and stealing from the other races, not too dissimilar from their Celtic counterparts. They also have the added bonus of being really racist towards giants, for some reason, plotting to kill them for weeks at a time. Not cool.
Is it kissing goblins? Is Trump gonna have babies with a goblin?
Although they keep the creature type of goblin, the goblins of Lorwyn are called bogarts, which, as you could probably guess, are the names of the actual folklore creatures. But the myths come from Yorkshire, so it's English folklore Folklore, not Celtic. Immersion Ruin, game literally unplayable. I'm selling all my cards. Bogarts in Yorkshire are basically just brownies, but evil. They inhabit houses or sometimes outdoor locations such as farms or caves, causing mischief and haunting the families they live with. Just like a child, you can't get too attached to them and name them, otherwise they get all crazy and destructive. So what do these evil beasts get up to? Unspeakable acts such as pulling the covers off of you at night, or putting their clammy hands on your face while you're sleeping. Actually, I think Bogarts are just house cats. In Lorwyn, the Bogarts are a tribal race that live in the forests and bogs of the land. They aren't as intelligent as some of the other humanoid races, but they are extremely perceptive, particularly with their sense of touch, feeling the continuous need to feel new things and share the experience with their tribe members. Usually this effort is funneled into thievery, although it isn't necessarily out of maleficence, rather it more so comes from a sort of sensory-driven kleptomania and the need to just get as many new feelings as they can. And of course on Shadowmoor, they get evil like everything else, and instead of feeling everything, they eat everything. Oh, my big fat belly.
Come over here and kiss me on my hot mouth. I'm feeling romantical.
Finally, time for my favorite tribe, Treefolk. Ooh yeah baby, we love trees, show me the trees. As far as I can find, there are no legends of anthropomorphic trees walking around Scotland and Ireland, but the concept of sacred trees is very prominent in Celtic religion and mythology. Celtic Britons under Roman occupation would popularly worship Darin, the goddess of the oak tree. There were different beliefs tied to different species of trees, such as ash seed pods were used in divination, and its wood was used for warding off fairies. Druidic wands were made of yew and apple wood. Fairies were thought to live in certain trees, such as hazels and elders, and the mountain ash or rowan and the alder tree were considered sacred to the point that cutting one down for wood was strictly forbidden. Some trees even represented months in the Old Irish calendar, and the alphabet of Old Irish, called Ogham, that was used from the 4th to 10th centuries AD, had each letter represented by a different type of tree or plant, A for pine, B for birch, C for hazel, and so on. There was a fertility ritual attested by Pliny the Elder, where druids would climb a sacred oak tree, cut off a piece of mistletoe with a golden sickle, and then sacrifice 2 white bulls. Anyway, as someone who does both woodworking and bonsai as hobbies, I find this really fascinating and I gotta stop myself before I go on too long. I sound like such a nerd. Oh, you guys want to hear some tree facts? Lorwyn's tree folks are arguably just as sacred, as their culture is far older than that of the other races of the realm, predating the earliest tribes by centuries. The trees do in fact be wise and mystical. They're versions of sacred groves or nurseries, and tree folk care for their groves full of dozens or hundreds of sapling babies at a time, before they all grow up and grow into a life of solitude, wandering the land of Lorwyn in search of knowledge. Other races will often seek out tree folk for their centuries of wisdom or knowledge of history. Sometimes the old head trees don't have time for all these new gen Diddy-Bloods. I'm sorry, I don't know why I wrote that. Mirroring the different beliefs and usages surrounding the different species of trees in Celtic mythology, the different quote-unquote species of trees in Lorwyn have their own perspective natures and roles within treefolk society. Ashes are guardians and most often friendly towards the other races. Black poplars are healers that take on the pain from their patients, although often being evil. Oaks are warriors and philosophers, and also the tallest treefolk. Rowans and birches are mages, some belonging to an organization called the Sunrise Break, which is dedicated to destroying all things unnatural, especially metal objects. The yew are almost extinct because there's Colfinor, the last yew, and he had to be the last one to get the cool name, so they made the others extinct. And then there's the elders, which are an actual type of tree in real life, which are the literal elders and old leaders of the tree folk. Really creative there, guys. Way to go.
I am going to have sex with the female flame astronaut from Oblivion.
Last and least, and by least I mean least amount of real-world folklore references, are the elementals. Elementals in Lorwyn and Shadowmoor fall into 2 categories, Flamekin and the Greater Elementals. Flamekin are humanoid creatures made of smooth stone and fire that take residence in the mountains of Lorwyn. They are semi-nomadic, passionate, and use their fiery bodies both as weapons and as tools for crafts like smithing, both for themselves and for the other races. But not elves. They hate those filthy knife ears. On the other hand, the Greater Elementals are completely different, taking on strange, eclectic forms of multiple animals and being much larger than the Flamekin. The Greater Elementals serve as manifestations of the emotions and lives of the beings within Lorwyn, in the most literal way possible. If there's a battle occurring between 2 tribes, war elementals will appear. If one clan betrays another, deceit appears. If all is peaceful in the realm, the incarnations of violence and strife will disappear, and elementals like Vibrance will take shape. No one race controls the Greater Elementals, and each has their own legends and myths about them, so in a way they themselves are kind of like the mythology of of the people of Lorwyn. Elementals in real life, well, they're not real, but the concept of elementals, are an invention of Paracelsus, who was a Swiss philosopher, esotericist, and alchemist living in the 16th century. His concept was that each of the 4 classical elements, earth, wind, fire, and water, each had a mythical creature that was the incarnate of that element. Gnomes for earth, undines for water, sylphs for air, and salamanders for fire. Hey, I'm no esoteric philosopher, but I've held a salamander, and it was wet. So that Paracelsus guy is kinda stupid if you ask me. Also, fun fact, the elementals in the original Lorwyn set were almost named Salamances, in reference to the alchemical elementals, but they didn't because that's a Pokemon. But this video isn't about Paracelsian alchemy, it's about Celtic mythology, which don't have elementals. But they do have the Will-o'-the-Wisp, which is close enough, I guess. The Will-o'-the-Wisp, aka Jack-o'-lantern, is a ghost that takes the form of a ball of fire. This is actually a widespread belief across world cultures, appearing in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. And the Irish folklore is fairly unique in the fact that they supposedly revealed the location of buried treasure, because why not? Flamekin are probably only inspired by the Will-o'-the-Wisp in my imagination, but it's the closest thing to a Celtic flame creature that I could find.
Did you see it?
On the left side of the doorframe.
Also, I think it could be argued that the greater elementals could be inspired by 1, the bizarre spirit creatures in the Otherworld, and 2, the animistic beliefs of the ancient Celtic religion. In animism, people would believe in spirits that inhabit nature, animals, places, really just anything. The greater elementals literally embody the collective emotions of the inhabitants of Lorwyn. So, in a way, these spirits live throughout all of the creatures of Lorwyn, or at least live via those creatures. Since the people of Lorwyn have mythologies about the greater elementals, they are manifesting that folklore into real spirits in an almost pataphysical type of way. In a sense, that's the most literal form of animism you can get. Okay, so there's a few cards in the Lorwyn and Shadowmoor sets that are direct references to Celtic folklore that either weren't included with the major humanoid races or they just have 1 or 2 cards, so I'll just quickly rattle them off. Duergars are dwarves in English folklore. Sometimes they're just called bogles or bogarts, like the goblins. In folklore, they are little guys who would appear at night and lead travelers astray into bogs, and in Shadowmoor, they live underground permanently and they diggy hole. Hobgoblins, or just hobs, are a race of goblins exclusively in Shadowmoor. I know I already said that the Kithkin were the magic equivalent of the hobs in folklore, but these goblins stole the name. They're more civilized than the average goblin and live in small villages akin to hobs in English folklore, but they're still feisty little things, and they aggressively defend those villages. Also, they ride on giant cicadas, which is pretty freaking cool. Spriggans are also goblins, and appear in Cornish folklore, said to be the ghosts of giants, and appear around ruins as grotesque old men with the heads of children. They steal, scare travelers, and destroy crops, just like real old people. Apparently you can scare them away if you turn your clothes inside out, and then you can take their stuff when they drop it. Okay. In Magic, they also only appear in Shadowmoor and are basically just green mana goblins that have the ability to grow in size, and they like to eat stuff. Apparently they eat nothing but Trin, because they are absolutely roided. Hags are essentially witches in English folklore. They are reclusive old women who curse people with nightmares and sleep paralysis. In Celtic mythology, there is a goddess hag called the Cailleach, who is the goddess of the harvest, weather, and creation, and is typically partnered with another goddess named Brige, wherein the Cailleach is goddess over the winter months and Brige over the summer months. Magic borrows both from the folkloric and religious sides of the hag myths, because in Shadowmoor, hags are said to be former goddesses presiding over the swamps who fell from divinity and took the form of the ugly little critters known as hags. Also under the creature type of hag, we have Gwyllions, which are the hags of Welsh folklore, except they're also ghosts, and also fairies, because everything's a fairy. Gwyllions haunt roads and make travelers lose their direction, but don't worry, you can ward them off in the same way that real people in the UK ward off others, by pulling a knife on them. Gwyllions in Shadowmoor also prey on travelers, but only if they wander into the Gwyllions villages, but otherwise they're pretty chill. Noggles, or Nuggles, as they're known in Shetland mythology, are shape-shifting water spirits that usually take on the appearance of a horse, but with a wheel-shaped tail, whatever that means. Unlike most Celtic water spirits, they don't try to drown you or even hurt you, but they might pull a little sneaky on you. Noggles in Shadowmoor are donkey-headed humanoids that steal everything not bolted down because they can't make anything themselves. Much like your average just chatting Twitch streamer, watching video essays because they are incapable of making anything on their own. Trolls are mischievous fairies, again, in Scottish folklore, especially in the Scottish Islands. They are nocturnal creatures and, ironically, can appear as either giants or as tiny fairies dressed in grey, and are most likely inspired by the trolls of Scandinavian folklore, both in tales and in etymology. Trolls in Shadowmoor are also nocturnal hunters, really just human-sized trolls.
We pray at night, we stalk at night.
Korgans are small, dwarf-like, gnome-like little fellows from Breton folklore. They hang out by wells and fountains and aura farm with their crimson eyes and beautiful long hair. They lure in men and make them fall in love with them. Wait, aren't these things like child size? Who are they luring in? The president? Like, instead of drawing people out to sea to drown them, they take them to Epstein's Island. Anyway, Korrigans and magic are the Shadowmoor version of spirits in Lorwyn, apparently only related to Korrigans of mythology in name alone. Puka are shapeshifters in Celtic and English folklore, and despite Puka being the old English word for goblin, they typically take on the appearance of horses, goats, cats, dogs, or hares, usually with black fur. Or they appear as this thing, as one Victorian author illustrated, which is his idea of a, quote, sufficiently grotesque elfish aspect. This looks like something that I would doodle on our map when I'm playing Slay the Spire with my friends, and then I'd say, look at this funny little character. They serve as harbingers of both good and bad fortune, and while in horse form, they like to pick up unsuspecting travelers on their backs and take them for a scary ride and then drop them back off. In Shadowmoor, they become shapeshifters, appearing either with a horse head or, more terrifyingly, appearing as a furry. The magical stones throughout Lorwyn and Shadowmoor are meant to represent Pictish stones, which are large monolithic stones with engravings of murals, writing, or after the Christianization of the region, crosses. These were primarily made by the Picts, a people group living in what is now Scotland in the early medieval period. References to these appear all over artwork in the Lorwyn sets, most iconically on Arcane Signet and the good version of the Soulstone. And finally, there's plovers, which are giant birds that Kithkin train and fly on, which aren't mythological, they're just a family of birds in the real world, and some of them live in the UK and Ireland, and I just included them because they're actually pretty dang freaking cute. Alright, so to summarize, TLDR is that basically every creature from Celtic mythology is either a fairy or a siren, or both. It was a bit hard to delineate a lot of these creatures because some of them are just different regional names on the same creature. There will be like 10 different names from 5 different languages, and then there's like regional variations based on those languages. For example, the brownie has like brownie, bruni, brunade, grugak, hobgoblin, and then regional variants include hobs, urusks, whatever, Bwebek, and then the Manx Finodiri, which that's like just the language spoken on the Isle of Man, so like 2 people speak it. So yeah, needless to say, this got very confusing at certain points. But there you have it. That's every single reference I could find to Celtic mythology in the plane of Lorwyn Shadowmoor. Are there more references in there somewhere? Probably. The designers of Magic really packed a ton of folklore into these sets, and it's really great to see such creativity flourish. I didn't know much about Lorwyn before Lorwyn Eclipsed released, but after doing this video, I think it's one of my favorite planes in Magic. I love sets based on real life cultures and history, and Lorwyn just feels so authentic and immersive because of it. It's almost hard to believe that these are the same game designers pumping nostalgia slop down our throats. I just found out that they're making more Deadpool cards, and it makes me like actually angry. If I sit down to play somewhere and you whip out one of these stupid Quark Chungus, Holds of Spork, Redditor, Humor, Abominations, I'm killing you first. In real life. Also, if you're an audio listener right now on screen, I'm opening a vintage Morningtide pack. Yippee. Alright, well, I don't know if anyone's still watching at this point because I don't know if anyone still cares about Lorwyn. This was like 5 sets ago. They release like a set a month now, so that's basically ancient history, but if you are, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I am a very new channel. This is my 3rd video, so if you could, you know, hit that like and subscribe. It genuinely does help. And also maybe send this video to a friend who might like it. You could tell them, hey, I found possibly the first YouTuber in the history of this website to make a video about Irish culture and not joke about the potato famines or the Troubles. Also, I'm going to be opening more of these vintage packs from the Lorwyn block, someplace really cool in a few months that is relevant to this video, if you catch my drift. So subscribe for that too. And if you don't subscribe, that place is going to be outside your window. Yeah, that's a freaking threat, buddy. I've got lots more videos planned, both magic related and non-magic related, so stick around. And I know this video took me forever to get out, but I started a new job right after my last video. I think it was like the day after, and so I didn't have energy for a while. And then this video took me a ton of time to research and, you know, edit, record, all that. My script was like 12 pages long. For the sake of my sanity, I don't want to know how many hours I spent in Premiere editing this, but hopefully you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. It was a lot of fun. And with that, Cael Dir Nosta, which is Welsh for have a good day. See, I respect the Welsh. Okay, that's all, bye.